The courtroom froze. All attention was on a light-skinned girl with wide, innocent eyes, standing at the witness stand clutching a worn-out teddy bear in her small hands. On one side stood a black woman, on the other a white woman. Both shouted passionately, "She's my daughter." The judge held a white envelope containing the DNA test results that would decide the girl's fate and answer the burning question on everyone's mind. Who is the real mother? And what lies behind this extraordinary drama? The ending to this story will change everything you thought you knew about truth. Who do you think is the girl's real mother? Let us know in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the most touching and surprising stories. The courtroom was an imposing place, with its high ceilings and cold, echoing walls. Rows of wooden benches were filled with spectators, their eyes trained on the small figure standing at the center of the room. The little girl looked so out of place there, surrounded by adults with sharp voices and stern faces. She clutched a worn teddy bear tightly to her chest, her small hands gripping its frayed fur as though it were the only thing tethering her to safety in this unfamiliar and intimidating world. Her dress, though neat, was simple and slightly too large, as if it had been handed down from someone older. Her dark curls framed her round face, her wide eyes darting nervously around the room. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that it was about her, and it wasn't good. The weight of so many pairs of eyes staring at her made her knees wobble slightly, but she stood firm, her teddy bear her silent companion and source of courage. At one table, a black woman with tear-streaked cheeks sat upright, her hands gripping the edge of the table as though trying to steady herself. Her expression was a mixture of heartbreak and defiance, her gaze never leaving the little girl. At the opposing table sat a white woman, her perfectly coiffed hair and expensive clothing creating a stark contrast to the other woman's simpler appearance. Her face was tight with determination, though her eyes betrayed flickers of doubt. The room hummed with barely contained tension. Whispers rippled through the rows of spectators like a wave, each murmur adding to the storm of judgments and assumptions. Some leaned forward, hungry for the drama that had gripped the town since this case began. Others exchanged pointed glances, their silent biases written plainly on their faces. The girl tried not to cry. Her small chest rose and fell rapidly as she gripped her teddy bear even tighter. She didn't know what to do. What could she say that would make this stop? Her gaze flickered to the black woman, who gave her a soft, encouraging nod, and then to the white woman, whose expression was unreadable. It was as if the entire room was frozen in a tableau, with her at the center of the storm. "Order in the court," the judge's voice rang out, breaking the uneasy quiet. He was an older man with a stern face, his silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. In his hands was a white envelope, the contents of which would determine the fate of the little girl clutching her bear. As the room fell silent, the girl's breathing seemed to echo in her ears. She wanted to speak, to ask why everyone was fighting, why she had to stand there in front of so many strangers. But the words stayed locked inside her, tangled up with fear and confusion. The teddy bear, its once bright eyes now dull and scratched, seemed to absorb her tension. She pressed it close to her chest, hoping its familiar texture would keep her from falling apart. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the overwhelming reality of where she was. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a place of justice, it was a stage for a deeply personal and painful drama. Everyone there seemed to have an opinion, a judgment, a preconceived notion of who deserved to win this battle. But to the little girl, it wasn't about winning. She didn't understand the stakes or the complexities. All she knew was that she wanted to feel safe, to feel loved, and to go home, wherever that might be. The gavel struck the sound block, jolting her back to the present. The judge cleared his throat, his expression unreadable as he prepared to address the courtroom. The little girl tightened her grip on her teddy bear, bracing herself for whatever was about to come next. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, each word thrown into the air like a weapon, each voice louder and more desperate than the last. At the heart of the chaos stood the little girl, clutching her teddy bear, her wide eyes darting between the two women who were now shouting over one another. Their words echoed off the wooden walls, filling the space with accusations, pain, and a desperation that felt almost tangible. I carried her for 9 months. She's my blood, my child, the white woman cried, her voice trembling but resolute. Her perfectly styled hair and polished appearance seemed out of place amidst the raw emotions she was displaying. Her hands were clenched into fists on the table, her face flushed with indignation. She doesn't even know you, the black woman shot back, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. I raised her. I've been there for her every single day, through everything. She's mine, and you're not going to take her from me. Her posture was defensive, her eyes blazing with a mother's protective fire. Tears streaked her face, but her resolve was unshaken. The spectators in the courtroom leaned forward, their eyes flickering between the two women as if watching a tragic play unfold. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a toxic undercurrent of judgment and prejudice. She doesn't look like she belongs to her, someone muttered, eyes darting toward the black woman. Can't she see that girl's better off with her real mother, another added, nodding toward the white woman. The words weren't meant for the women to hear, but they landed like blows nonetheless. The black woman stiffened, her fists clenching as she turned her gaze toward the gallery, her pain and anger simmering just beneath the surface. The judge banged his gavel sharply, his stern voice cutting through the noise. Order! I will not tolerate outbursts from the gallery or the parties involved. But even as the room quieted, the tension remained, thick and heavy like a storm waiting to break. The white woman took a deep breath, her voice trembling but insistent. She deserves to know her real mother. I can give her a life she deserves, security, opportunities, a home where she belongs. Belongs? The black woman's voice rose, her anger barely restrained. She belongs with the person who has loved her, cared for her, and been there for her every single day. Not someone who shows up out of nowhere and claims her like she's some kind of prize. The girl flinched at the sharpness of their words, her grip tightening on the teddy bear. She didn't understand the intricacies of what they were arguing about, all she knew was that both women were talking about her as though she weren't even there. Her small frame trembled, but she stayed rooted to the spot, afraid to move or make a sound. The white woman's lawyer stood, attempting to regain control of the narrative. Your Honor, my client has provided ample evidence of her biological relationship with the child. The results of the DNA test will confirm this unequivocally. The black woman's lawyer rose in turn, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Your Honor, biology doesn't define a mother. Love, care, and sacrifice do. My client has been the only mother this child has ever known. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he listened. His eyes occasionally flicked toward the girl, whose small, trembling form seemed to radiate the weight of the moment. He tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought, but the room remained a battleground. She's too young to understand what's best for her, the white woman said, her voice softening as she tried to appeal to the judge's sense of reason. But I know. I know what she needs, and I'm the only one who can give it to her. She's not too young to know who loves her, the black woman countered, her voice breaking. She knows who's been there for her, who's wiped her tears, who's held her when she was scared. You don't get to erase that. The girl's gaze flickered between the two women, her small face pale and her lips trembling. She wanted to shout, to tell them to stop, to make them see how much their fighting hurt her. But her voice felt trapped, swallowed by the enormity of the moment. The courtroom felt like it might explode from the weight of the emotions contained within its walls. The spectators sat on the edge of their seats, some openly siding with one woman or the other, while others watched in stunned silence. The lines of prejudice were starkly drawn, shaping opinions before the truth could even be revealed. The judge finally raised his hand, signaling for quiet. The room fell into a tense silence, but the air still crackled with unspoken words and unresolved anger. "Enough," he said firmly. "This court will determine what is best for the child. Until then, I expect all parties to remain composed." But as the argument subsided, the damage lingered, hanging in the air like a toxic fog. The little girl stood at the center of it all, holding on to her teddy bear as if it were the only thing keeping her afloat in a sea of chaos. For her, this wasn't just a courtroom, it was a battlefield where she was the prize, and she didn't know how much longer she could endure the fight. The little girl sat at the center of it all, her wide eyes darting between the two women. She didn't understand the layers of prejudice and judgment surrounding her, but she felt the tension, the way the air seemed to vibrate with something unkind. She held her teddy bear closer, her small hands gripping it tightly, as though it could shield her from the weight of the room's disdain. The judge glanced at the gallery, his face betraying a flicker of frustration. He could feel the biases in the air as well, but he didn't address them. Instead, he returned his focus to the case, his voice sharp as he called for the next piece of evidence. The whispers died down, but the prejudice lingered. It was in the way people shifted in their seats, in the subtle glances and the way their bodies turned away from the black woman as though distancing themselves from her struggle. It was a silent verdict rendered before the judge could even deliberate, a bias so ingrained that it didn't need words to make its presence known. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, the black woman walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, but her steps were heavy. The white woman exited moments later, surrounded by murmurs of support and sympathetic smiles. The stark contrast was undeniable, a reminder that this wasn't just a battle for custody, it was a battle against a system, a society, and a world that had already decided who was worthy before the truth could even be heard. The courtroom was tense, every word spoken cutting through the heavy air like a blade. The judge called for testimonies, and all eyes turned to the black woman first. She stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the folds of her modest dress. Her gaze shifted to the little girl clutching her teddy bear, and for a moment, her face softened. But when she turned back to the judge, her expression was firm, determined to make her voice heard. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word, "this little girl, she's my daughter in every way that matters. I've been there for her since the day she came into my life. I've kissed her scraped knees, wiped her tears, and sung her to sleep when the nightmares wouldn't let her rest." The room was silent, save for the scratching of pens and the soft murmurs of court officials. She continued, painting a vivid picture of the life they had shared. "I remember the day she first smiled at me," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "It was after weeks of fear, weeks of her clinging to that bear and hiding from the world. But that smile, it was like she finally believed she was safe." The spectators were divided in their reactions. Some leaned in, visibly moved by her words, while others sat back with skeptical expressions, their biases whispering louder than the truth. The prosecutor, standing beside the white woman, watched her closely, waiting for a chance to dismantle her story. "I've done everything I could to give her a good life," the black woman said, her hands now gripping the edge of the witness stand. "It hasn't been easy, but I've loved her like my own flesh and blood. She is my flesh and blood, no matter what anyone says." The judge nodded curtly, motioning for her to take a seat. "Thank you," he said, his tone neutral, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes, empathy, perhaps, or doubt. It was impossible to tell. Then it was the white woman's turn. She rose confidently, smoothing her tailored skirt as she stepped to the witness stand. Her demeanor was calm and composed, a sharp contrast to the raw emotion displayed by the black woman. She adjusted the microphone and smiled faintly, as though trying to project warmth and reassurance. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and practiced, "I'm here today because I want what's best for this little girl. I've prepared for this moment, not because I want to take her from anyone, but because I believe I can offer her the life she deserves." She glanced at the black woman, her expression carefully neutral, but her words carried an undertone of criticism. "I have a stable home, a secure income, and a family that can provide her with opportunities she would otherwise never have." The prosecutor stepped forward, handing her a stack of documents. She gestured to them with a calm hand. "These are records of my financial stability, my educational background, and the environment I can offer her. I've also included letters from friends and colleagues who can vouch for my character." The white woman's lawyer nodded approvingly, his confidence apparent. Her words were measured and deliberate, designed to appeal to logic and reason. But they lacked the heart, the raw authenticity, of the black woman's testimony. Still, the room responded differently to her. There were nods of agreement, murmurs of approval, as though her polished presentation had validated her claims in a way the black woman's heartfelt story could not. She turned toward the girl, her voice softening. "I've always dreamed of being a mother," she said, a faint tremor in her tone. "And when I found out that this little girl might be my daughter, I knew I had to fight for her. Not for myself, but for her future." The girl stared at her, her expression unreadable. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her small frame seeming to shrink under the weight of the moment. When the white woman finished, the courtroom fell silent again. The judge scribbled a note, his brow furrowed as he weighed the testimonies. He called for a brief recess, and the room erupted into quiet murmurs as people speculated on what would happen next. The black woman sat at her table, her hands folded tightly, her gaze fixed on the little girl. The white woman returned to her seat, her lawyer leaning in to whisper something encouraging. But the unspoken tension in the room remained. Was this about love, or was it about proving who was better? For the little girl, the words swirled around her like an indecipherable storm. All she knew was that two women were fighting over her, and neither seemed to truly see her. She clung to her bear, her only constant in a world that felt increasingly uncertain, as the courtroom waited to see whose voice would carry the most weight. The courtroom fell into an almost eerie silence as the judge reached for the white envelope. Its pristine edges seemed to glow under the stark overhead lights, making it the undeniable focal point of the room. Every pair of eyes was locked on it, the small, unassuming package holding the answer to a question that had fractured lives and ignited emotions far beyond its simple contents. The tension was suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone in the room. The judge, an older man with sharp features and silver hair, adjusted his glasses with deliberate slowness. His face was a mask of neutrality, but his rigid posture and the slight downturn of his mouth hinted at something colder, disapproval, perhaps, or a reluctance to confront what the envelope might reveal. He cleared his throat, the sound loud and jarring in the stillness, before resting his fingers on the envelope's edge. The black woman sat at her table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes never left the judge, though her expression was a mix of hope and trepidation. Her entire body seemed to tremble, as though bracing for a blow she couldn't see coming. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering something meant to reassure her, but she barely seemed to hear it. Across the room, the white woman sat with an air of calculated calm. Her fingers traced the hem of her skirt, a faint smile playing at her lips as though she was already certain of the outcome. Her lawyer smoothed his tie, glancing around the room with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The quiet murmur of support from the spectators near her table only reinforced the atmosphere of expectation, that the answer would fall in her favor. The little girl, standing near the center of the room, hugged her teddy bear tightly. Her wide, frightened eyes flicked between the judge and the women who claimed to love her. She didn't understand the importance of the envelope, but she could feel its weight in the air, pressing down on everyone around her. Her small frame seemed to shrink further as she tried to disappear into the comfort of her worn toy. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge began, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. He lifted the envelope with both hands, his movements deliberate and heavy with meaning. "This document contains the DNA results, which will determine the biological relationship of the child in question. I expect everyone in this courtroom to remain silent and composed as I read its contents." His tone was cold, mechanical, as though he were announcing the outcome of a bureaucratic procedure rather than deciding the fate of a child. The black woman flinched slightly at the impersonal delivery, her lips parting as if to protest, but she quickly caught herself. The white woman, by contrast, leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable but composed. The judge's hands moved to tear open the envelope, and the sound of ripping paper seemed to echo like thunder in the room. Spectators leaned forward, their breaths collectively held, the weight of expectation crackling like static electricity. But as the judge unfolded the paper inside, his expression hardened further. His eyes scanned the page, moving back and forth with a precision that seemed almost clinical. Whatever he was reading, it was impossible to discern how it affected him. His face remained stoic, his body rigid, as if the truth on the paper was just another fact to be filed away, not the key to someone's entire world. The black woman's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with possibilities. She wanted to scream, to beg him to say the words already, to stop dragging out the moment that felt like it was stretching into eternity. Across the room, the white woman sat up straighter, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes locked on the judge as though willing him to speak the words she wanted to hear. Finally, the judge folded the paper in half, placing it deliberately on the bench in front of him. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose before addressing the room. His tone remained cold, his demeanor unreadable. "The results," he began, pausing to glance between the two women, "confirm the biological relationship between the child and one of the parties present today." The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence so thick it felt like a physical presence. The black woman leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The white woman's faint smile widened, her confidence radiating across the room. However, the judge continued, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension, "This court recognizes that biology is not the sole determinant of parenthood. The welfare of the child is paramount, and the results of this test are but one piece of the larger picture." A ripple of murmurs spread through the spectators, quickly silenced by the gavel's sharp crack. The judge's gaze swept across the room, his expression stern and unyielding. "I will issue my ruling shortly. Until then, I remind everyone here that this is a court of law, not a platform for personal bias or prejudice." As the judge signaled for a brief recess, the tension in the room did not dissipate. Instead, it grew heavier, the weight of the unanswered question pressing harder on everyone present. The black woman stared at the folded paper on the bench, her heart aching with the fear that the truth might not be enough. The white woman exchanged a confident glance with her lawyer, as though already planning her next move. And in the center of it all, the little girl clutched her teddy bear, her small frame trembling as the adults around her fought over a piece of paper that seemed to hold the power to decide her fate. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of tension, with every second ticking by amplifying the weight of unspoken words and simmering emotions. The judge sat behind the bench, his face a mask of authority, as the two women, seated on opposite sides of the room, glared at one another. The black woman's hands were trembling on the table, her lips pressed tightly together, while the white woman sat upright, her composure betraying the storm of emotions brewing beneath her polished exterior. In the midst of it all stood the little girl, a small, fragile figure clutching her worn teddy bear. Her wide eyes darted between the adults, confusion and fear etched across her face. The voices of the two women rose again, each one louder and more desperate than the last, their words tumbling over each other in a chaotic battle of claims and accusations. "She's my daughter. She belongs with me. I can give her the life she deserves. I've been there for her every single day. You think love is enough when she needs stability?" The arguments blurred together into a cacophony of anger and desperation. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, some eager for the drama, others visibly uncomfortable with the emotional intensity of the scene. Even the judge, a figure of supposed impartiality, rubbed his temple in frustration, his gavel sitting untouched beside him. And then, amidst the chaos, a small voice broke through. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that silenced every other sound in the room. "I just want to be loved." The little girl's words hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament, delicate but impossible to ignore. Everyone froze. The black woman's mouth parted, her words cut short as her gaze snapped to the child. The white woman's composure faltered, her carefully rehearsed argument slipping from her mind. Even the judge's pen, which had been scratching notes moments earlier, stopped mid-stroke. The girl shifted her grip on the teddy bear, her small fingers digging into its threadbare fur. Her voice trembled as she continued, her eyes filling with tears that threatened to spill over. "I don't care who's right. I just want someone to love me and not fight about me." Her words were like a mirror held up to the courtroom, reflecting the ugliness of what had been unfolding. The heated arguments, the accusations, the pride and egos, all of it seemed trivial and shameful in the face of her quiet, honest plea. For a moment, the room was utterly still. The judge leaned back in his chair, his stern expression softening as he regarded the child. His gavel remained untouched, as though he, too, understood that the resolution of this case had to begin with hearing her voice. The black woman's face crumpled, tears streaming freely now as she whispered, "Baby, I do love you. I love you more than anything in this world." The white woman's eyes filled with an emotion that was harder to define, perhaps regret, perhaps realization. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice breaking, "we both love you." But the girl shook her head, a small sob escaping her lips. "Then why do you fight? If you love me, why do you make me feel like I don't belong to anyone?" The room collectively exhaled, a murmur rippling through the spectators. Some wiped away tears, others exchanged guilty glances, as though ashamed to have been part of the spectacle that had placed this burden on such small shoulders. The judge cleared his throat, his voice unusually gentle as he addressed the girl. "Thank you for sharing that, young lady," he said. "Your feelings matter, and I promise you, we're going to do what's best for you." The girl nodded, her tears slowing as she tightened her hold on the teddy bear. Her small words had shifted the energy of the room, forcing everyone to see the case for what it truly was, not a fight for victory or validation, but a fight for a child's future and her right to feel loved and safe. The black woman and the white woman sat in stunned silence, their arguments forgotten, their pride dimmed. For the first time, they both looked at the girl not as a point of contention, but as a child, a vulnerable, hurting child who deserved far better than the chaos they had created around her. The courtroom doors creaked open, drawing every pair of eyes toward the figure who stepped inside. A man, middle-aged and slightly stooped, entered the room with an air of hesitance. His worn suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hands nervously adjusted the glasses perched on his nose. His presence was unassuming, yet it carried a weight that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow, his gavel hovering over the sound block. "State your name and reason for being here," he said, his voice stern but curious. The man cleared his throat, his voice shaky but steady enough to be heard. "My name is Arthur Lyle, Your Honor. I believe I have information that could help the court understand the full picture regarding the child's care." The black woman and the white woman exchanged wary glances, their postures stiffening. Neither had expected this man, and his arrival was as much a shock to them as it was to everyone else in the room. The judge gestured toward the witness stand. "Mr. Lyle, you may proceed." Arthur stepped forward, his hands gripping the edges of the witness stand as he seated himself. He glanced at the little girl, who clutched her teddy bear tightly, her gaze unsure but curious. Arthur offered her a small, reassuring smile before turning his attention back to the court. "I used to work for a local childcare agency," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I was responsible for checking in on children placed in temporary homes, ensuring they were safe and cared for. That's how I came to know this little girl." The judge leaned forward, his pen poised over a notepad. "And what did you observe during these visits?" Arthur's expression grew heavy, his words measured as though each carried the weight of his conscience. "I saw two very different environments. The girl was placed with each of these women at different times, for different reasons. Both claimed to want what was best for her, but their actions spoke louder than their words." He turned toward the black woman, his voice softening. "She gave that child love. Real love. I saw it every time I visited. The way she held her when she cried, the way she stayed up with her when she was sick. She didn't have much, but everything she had, she gave to that little girl." The black woman's eyes glistened with tears, her hands clasped tightly together as she nodded. Her lawyer offered her a quiet word of encouragement, but her focus remained on Arthur, her gratitude unspoken but clear. Arthur then turned toward the white woman, his tone shifting. "You provided for her material needs," he said, his words careful but firm. "But I often found her sitting alone, clutching that teddy bear. You were always busy, work, social obligations. I'm not saying you didn't care, but love isn't something you can delegate. She needed more than what money could buy." The white woman's face reddened, her lawyer immediately standing to object. "Your Honor, this is hearsay and speculative at best." The judge raised a hand to silence him. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Lyle." Arthur nodded, his gaze steady. "I remember one visit in particular," he said, his voice growing softer. "It was raining. I arrived at the black woman's home, and the little girl was in her arms, crying because she'd had a nightmare. The woman was rocking her, whispering that everything would be okay. It wasn't just care, it was connection, trust. That's what children need." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. Both of these women had their moments of good intentions, but intentions aren't enough. What I saw in her, he pointed gently toward the black woman, was a bond. A true mother's love. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Arthur's testimony settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. The spectators exchanged glances, their earlier judgments softened by the heartfelt honesty of his words. The little girl looked at Arthur, her wide eyes filled with something close to understanding. Slowly, she hugged her teddy bear tighter, her small body trembling as the room absorbed the truth. The judge took a deep breath, his pen tapping lightly against the desk. "Mr. Lyle, your testimony has provided significant context." "Thank you." Arthur nodded, his expression one of quiet relief as he stood and left the stand. The black woman's lawyer exchanged a quick, hopeful glance with his client, while the white woman's lawyer hurriedly jotted notes, his confidence visibly shaken. The truth had come to light, not through flashy arguments or rehearsed declarations, but through quiet, simple observations of love and care. For the first time, the case no longer felt like a battle of egos but a reflection of what truly mattered, the little girl and the life she deserved. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that carries weight, pressing down on everyone present. The judge sat behind his imposing desk, his expression a careful mask of composure, though his furrowed brow and the way he tapped his pen against the wood betrayed the emotional toll of the case. In front of him, the two women sat on opposite sides of the room. Both were tense, their postures rigid, their eyes locked on the man who now held the future of the little girl in his hands. The girl herself sat quietly near the center of the courtroom, her small frame barely filling the wooden chair. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her beloved teddy bear, the frayed edges of its fabric worn from years of being clutched. She looked at the judge with wide, questioning eyes, unaware of the monumental decision about to be made but keenly aware of the tension surrounding her. The judge cleared his throat, the sound sharp and jarring in the stillness. "This has been one of the most challenging cases I have presided over in my career," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "The evidence presented and the testimonies shared have illuminated not just the facts of this case but the humanity that lies at its heart. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on the two women. "This is not a decision I take lightly, and I understand that no matter the outcome, it will carry profound implications for everyone involved." The black woman sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the judge, her expression a mix of hope and fear. The white woman, on the other hand, maintained a carefully controlled demeanor, though her clenched jaw and stiff posture revealed the cracks in her composure. The judge took a deep breath, glancing briefly at the folded letter from Arthur Lyle's testimony in the stack of evidence before him. In cases like this, the law often leans on biological relationships to determine custody. However, biology alone does not define what it means to be a parent. Parenthood is about more than shared DNA, it is about love, commitment, and the willingness to put a child's needs above your own. A murmur rippled through the gallery, quickly silenced by a sharp rap of the gavel. The judge continued, his voice growing firmer. "This court has considered the facts, the evidence, and, most importantly, the well-being of the child. It is clear to me that both parties care deeply for this little girl. But one has demonstrated a consistent ability to provide her with the love, stability, and care that every child deserves." He paused, his gaze landing on the black woman. Her breath caught, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. "It is the ruling of this court," the judge said, his tone solemn, "that custody of the child will be granted to the respondent." The black woman's eyes widened, her lips parting in a gasp as the words sank in. For a moment, she seemed unable to move, as if frozen by disbelief. Then her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, murmuring congratulations, and the reality of what had just happened broke through. Tears streamed down her face, her hands covering her mouth as a sob escaped her. The white woman stiffened, her carefully composed expression crumbling into shock and then anger. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering rapidly, likely about appeals, but she barely seemed to hear him. Her gaze darted to the girl, who was watching everything unfold with quiet uncertainty. The judge addressed the courtroom once more. "This decision was made with the child's best interests in mind. It is not about wealth or appearances, but about who has shown the capacity to provide a home filled with love, patience, and security. That is the essence of parenthood, and that is what this child needs." He turned his attention to the little girl, his voice softening. "Young lady, I know this has been a very difficult time for you. But I want you to know that you are loved, and this court's decision is meant to ensure you have the care and support you deserve." The girl nodded slowly, clutching her teddy bear tighter. Her gaze shifted to the black woman, who was now crying openly but smiling through her tears. The girl's lips quivered, and she slid off the chair, taking a few tentative steps toward her. The black woman opened her arms, and the girl rushed into them, burying her face in her shoulder. The room erupted in murmurs, some of sympathy, others of dissent, but none of it mattered to the two figures now holding each other at the center of the courtroom. The black woman whispered softly into the girl's ear, her words too quiet for anyone else to hear, but the relief and love in her voice were unmistakable. The judge banged his gavel once more, signaling the end of the proceedings. "Court is adjourned," he said, his voice firm but tinged with finality. He stood, gathering his papers, but for a moment, he paused to watch the scene before him, the tearful reunion of a mother and daughter who had fought against the odds to find their way back to each other. As the room began to empty, the girl and the black woman remained in their embrace, oblivious to the world around them. It was a moment of triumph not just for them but for the idea that love and care could triumph over prejudice and judgment. And in that moment, justice felt not just served but truly meaningful. The trial had ended, but the echoes of its intensity lingered in the lives of everyone involved. The courtroom, once a battleground of heated accusations and raw emotions, was now quiet, its emptiness a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere of the days before. Yet, for the two women at the heart of the case, the journey was far from over. The black woman, now officially recognized as the girl's mother, sat in her modest living room, the little girl curled up beside her with the familiar teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. The air was heavy with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The weight of the court's decision had lifted one burden but left behind another, the challenge of navigating the complex emotions and relationships that remained. A knock at the door broke the silence, soft but deliberate. The black woman froze for a moment, her gaze flickering to the child, who looked up with wide, questioning eyes. She rose slowly, crossing the room with hesitant steps, and opened the door to find the white woman standing there. She looked different now, her usual polished confidence had been replaced by a quieter, almost vulnerable demeanor. In her hands, she held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Can we talk?" the white woman asked, her voice soft but steady. Her eyes carried the weight of humility, perhaps even regret. The black woman hesitated, her hand still on the doorframe. There was no anger in her expression, only a guarded curiosity. "Come in," she said finally, stepping aside. The two women sat across from each other, a small coffee table between them. The little girl watched from the couch, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile, more like two strangers trying to find common ground on unfamiliar terrain. "I wanted to say. I'm sorry," the white woman began, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was doing the right thing, fighting for her. But I see now that it wasn't about her. It was about me, about proving something that didn't need to be proven." The black woman studied her carefully, her hands resting on her lap. "You hurt us," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You made us feel like we weren't enough, like my love for her wasn't enough." "I know," the white woman said, her eyes welling up. "And I regret it more than I can say. But I do love her. I wasn't lying about that." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of those words settling over them. The little girl fidgeted on the couch, her gaze darting between the two women. Finally, the black woman spoke. "I believe you," she said quietly. "And I know you cared for her. I could see it. But love isn't about fighting for control, it's about giving without expecting something in return." The white woman nodded, her tears spilling over. "I don't want to take anything from you," she said. I want her to know that I care. That I'm here, if she ever wants to know more about me or her other side." The black woman's expression softened, the lines of tension around her mouth easing. "She deserves to know where she came from," she said. "To understand her whole story. If you're willing to respect her space, then I think we can find a way to make that happen." The little girl, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. "Does that mean I can see her sometimes?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Both women turned to her, their faces mirroring a shared sense of purpose. The black woman reached out and took her hand. "Yes, baby," she said gently. "But only if you want to." The white woman smiled through her tears, nodding. "I'll be here whenever you're ready," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "No pressure, no expectations." The girl hugged her teddy bear tighter, her small face lighting up with a hesitant but genuine smile. For the first time, she felt the tension between the two women ease, replaced by a tentative sense of unity. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it was a start. As the white woman left that evening, the black woman stood in the doorway, watching her go. There was no animosity in her expression, only a quiet resolve. She had fought for her daughter and won, but she understood that victory didn't mean shutting out the other pieces of the girl's story. It meant building something new, something that honored the truth while protecting the future. Inside, the little girl sat at the kitchen table, drawing a picture of three figures holding hands. When her mother returned, she held it up proudly. "It's us," she said, pointing to the two women and herself. "All together." The black woman's heart swelled as she knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "All together." The house was modest but warm, its walls adorned with family photos and hand-drawn pictures taped unevenly on the fridge. The little girl stepped through the doorway, her small hand clutching the larger, steady hand of the woman she now called her mother. The air inside felt different, calmer, lighter, and filled with an unspoken promise of new beginnings. Her beloved teddy bear was tucked under her arm, its frayed ear brushing against her cheek as she looked around. The familiarity of the home wrapped around her like a soft blanket, but it wasn't the furniture or the photographs that gave her comfort, it was the presence of the woman beside her. This was where she belonged. "Welcome home, baby," the black woman said softly, her voice carrying a tenderness that had seen them through the hardest of days. She knelt down, her hands gently resting on the girl's shoulders. "This is your space now, your safe place. We'll fill it with everything you love." The girl nodded, her lips curving into a shy smile. She let go of the woman's hand and wandered into the living room, her fingers brushing over the arm of the couch, the edge of the coffee table, and finally landing on a small bookcase filled with colorful spines. On top of the shelf was a new addition, a framed photo of the two of them, taken just days ago. In it, the woman held the girl in her lap, both of them laughing as though nothing else in the world mattered. As the girl's eyes lingered on the photo, the woman stood in the kitchen, unpacking groceries. She hummed softly to herself, a habit she developed during the years when she had to use every ounce of strength to stay hopeful. Today, the tune carried a different energy, one of relief and quiet joy. Her movements were purposeful but unhurried, as though she was savoring the simple act of preparing a meal for her daughter. Later that evening, the two of them sat at the dining table, sharing a dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread. The girl twirled noodles around her fork, giggling when one slipped and splattered sauce onto the table. The woman laughed along with her, grabbing a napkin and playfully dabbing at the girl's nose. It was an ordinary moment, but it felt extraordinary in its simplicity. After dinner, they curled up on the couch, the girl nestled against the woman's side with her teddy bear still in hand. They picked out a storybook, one of the girl's favorites, and took turns reading the pages. The girl's voice was small and halting at first, but the woman encouraged her gently, smiling with pride at each word she stumbled through. As the night deepened, the girl was tucked into her bed, a small, cozy space adorned with fairy lights and her growing collection of drawings taped to the walls. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her eyes already beginning to flutter closed. The woman leaned down, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "You're safe. You're home." The girl mumbled a soft, "Good night, Mama," before drifting off to sleep, her face peaceful and her small body finally at rest after so much turmoil. In the days and weeks that followed, the house became a place filled with laughter and love. The woman encouraged the girl to express herself, through drawing, writing, and even little impromptu dance performances in the living room. They planted flowers in the small backyard, choosing bright, cheerful blooms that mirrored the new life they were building together. Slowly but surely, the shadows of the past began to fade, replaced by the steady light of their bond. The white woman, too, kept her word, staying present but respectful. She sent the girl small notes and pictures, gentle reminders that she was still part of her story. The girl, with her mother's support, began to see her as a piece of her past that didn't have to be forgotten but didn't define her either. Their story became a quiet inspiration in their community. Neighbors who had once judged now looked at them with a newfound respect, realizing that their family had triumphed not because of the system, but despite it. They were living proof that love, resilience, and fairness could overcome even the heaviest of prejudices. As the little girl and her mother sat on the porch one sunny afternoon, sipping lemonade and watching the world go by, the girl looked up at her and said, "I'm happy, Mama." The woman smiled, her heart full. "Me too, baby. Me too." This story reminds us all that even in the face of hardship and injustice, love can triumph. It shows that healing is possible when people come together with open hearts and a willingness to change. What do you think about this journey of love, hope, and fairness? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of resilience and humanity. Thank you for being part of this story with us.